Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. You could find your seats, grab a refreshment from the back. I want to make a quick note that all of our presentations so far have been live streamed, and they are also accessible for your viewing later on as well. They're going to go ahead and just stay on our website. So if there's anything that you missed so far, or any presentations that you were at and you particularly liked and thought, hey, I want to look back at that later, it's available on our website. Or you can certainly have other people come check it out as well. So again, just for your convenience there. This morning, I'm going to invite one of our board members, Kevin McNamara, up to give the introduction. Thank you.
Be nice. Good morning. My name is Kevin McNamara, and I'm privileged to be on the Alumni Board of Directors. 52 years ago, I came to St. Meinrad as a freshman in college, one of 70 in our college class, and was 52 years later, I'm here introducing one of my classmates from that time. Archabbot Kurt not only is Archabbot of the church here, but 52 years ago, he had a pretty good fastball. And I think if he were ever to, he still loves baseball, has been in the College World Series as a fan. But he continues, even in his busy life, to throw the ball every now and again. And I think I heard that your fastball's up to 42 miles an hour now. When he finishes his term, he might, of course, if he ever played for a major league team, we know it would be the St. Louis Cardinals. Archabbot Kirk was elected Archabbot at St. Meinrad Archabbey on June 2nd of 2016. He's the 10th abbot of St. Meinrad. He graduated from St. Meinrad College in 1974 and received a Master's of Divinity in 1980 from the St. Meinrad School of Theology. He then earned a licentiate and a doctorate in sacramental theology from the Pontifical Athenaeum of Sant Anselmo in Rome. You can tell I left the seminary after 2 years of college and didn't get all those. From 1986 until 2016, Archabbot taught sacramental and liturgical theology in the Seminary and School of Theology, also serving as the director of spiritual formation for 10 years. He's the author of several books, most recently, From Sinners to Saints, A Guide to Understanding the Sacrament of Reconciliation. Today, Archabbot Kurt is here to share how Benedictine wisdom is applicable to our lives in his presentation entitled Benedictine Wisdom for Non-Monks. Please join me in welcoming my classmate, Archabbot Kurt Stasiak. God bless.
Good morning. I'm sorry, but my favorite team is the New York Yankees. I'm also sorry that I won't have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you. I am not a techie at all, so I go back to the old, black and white on the newspaper print and things like that. I'm going to start out with a diversion, which is a little bit unusual, but starting with last night, so many of you have asked me about this pectoral cross, which certainly is distinctive. So just a few words of explanation about that, because it is part of our history. Just about any time I talk with the tour group, sooner or later, and it's usually very soon, I will be asked the question, what's the difference between an archabbey and an abbey? And my first response is, well, that first syllable, the 4 letters there. That usually does not satisfy very much, so I go on to say that an archabbey has been designated an archabbey mainly for two reasons: that it was fundamental in instituting Benedictine monasticism in this area, in this large area like a country. But the second reason also that this particular abbey, now we're calling it an archabbey, has founded other monastic houses. And that is very much part of our history. Over the years, since 1870, when we became a priory, but over the years, we have made foundations in Arkansas, Louisiana, California, outside of Chicago, and in the Dakotas, up in Indian Territory. Our foundation of Blue Cloud Abbey up in the Dakotas, they voted to close down in 2012. They had been at it for 50 years. We're very pleased with the work they had done for the Indian missions, but decided they could no longer continue to do that work, and especially a story that's all too familiar to us, I think. They did not have much success in attracting native vocations. What happens when a monastery closes down? What happens to the monks? Sometimes they can be dispensed from their vows. Those who are priests often ask to be incardinated into another diocese. And those who are monks, whether they're priests or not, are free to request a transfer of stability to another monastery. And that's what happened to 4 of the Blue Cloud monks. They applied for a transfer of stability to us, and we accepted them. 2 of them have since died, but 2 of them, Father John McMullen, in fact, he was my first prior after I was elected. He is with us today. And Father Dennis Quinkert is with us today. Father Dennis holds the distinction of being elected abbot not once, but twice by the Blue Cloud community, and not in consecutive years. There was a gap there. This is the pectoral cross that Father Dennis was given shortly after he was blessed as abbot by the Indian community there. And for the last couple of years, started a small custom among us here at St. Meinrad that as we approach the annual anniversary of the closing of Blue Cloud Abbey, which is coming up on this Friday, the abbot has been wearing the Blue Cloud pectoral as a reminder of our history and as a gesture of honor and thanksgiving to the 2 Blue Cloud monks that are still with us. So that's the story behind this. Something means something to us, of course, and that we wear it proudly and are grateful for the successes that Blue Cloud Abbey did have. What I want to offer this morning are some thoughts on how Benedictine wisdom, and I agree that is an assumption right to start with, Benedictine wisdom, that the Benedictine tradition has something to say to all of us, whether we are monks or not. But first, I want to make a couple of disclaimers, and if you've got that handout, you can kind of follow along with that. The first wrong assumption that people make a lot of times is that Benedict doesn't have a sense of humor. He does, because in one of his chapters, as you can see, we read that monks should not drink wine at all. But since the monks of our day cannot be convinced of this, and then he goes on and allows them, at least let them not drink more than such and such. We still hear conversations like that in the walls of the monastery today. St. Benedict was also very practical, so if anybody says he just had his head in the clouds, that's not true. There's a very practical directive on his chapter about how the monks are to sleep. They sleep clothed and girded with belts or cords, very biblical, very gospel-like, ready to leap out of bed and start their service in the morning. But they should remove their knives, lest they accidentally hurt or cut themselves in their sleep. Again, very practical. Some people still think that monks are very holy people and that they're always about God's work. We try to be about that, but we're also very human. And so Benedict has no illusions that monks are going to always be about monkly things. As he writes at one point in his rule, if a monk is late for prayer, he should come on in and sit in a separate place. Why? Well, should they remain outside the oratory, there may be those who would return to bed and sleep, or worse yet, settle down outside and engage in idle talk. This is still a situation we deal with from time to time in the monastery. In one of my favorite lines in terms of Benedict's sense of realism, monks were always full of good zeal. We'll be the first to say that we are not. As Benedict wrote, on arising for the work of God, they will quietly encourage each other, for the sleepy like to make excuses. And that is so true. That is so true. Getting on to the more serious aspects now, and again, we're assuming that Benedictine tradition does have some wisdom for all of us, whether we're monks or not, whether we're religious or not. First thing to remember is that Benedict did not write his rule for monks for hermits, for those who were living by themselves. He wrote his rule very much for people who were like us in a lot of ways. People who believed in God, people who wanted to improve or grow in their relationship with God, people who needed support as they went about trying to do that. So in many ways, Benedict's rule, Benedict's wisdom offers advice and encouragement to us all. Anybody who rubs shoulders, sometimes clumsily, sometimes painfully, with others. So I want to take you briefly through 5 passages which you have there, 5 passages from Benedict's rule that I believe can speak to us all. In line with that, Thomas Merton, 50 years ago, made the statement in one of his writings that there is a little bit of a monk inside each one of us. And part of the Christian vocation, part of the human vocation, he would say, is to try to find that little monk that's residing in us and see what he needs to feed upon to grow a little bit stronger. One of our apps in the monastery is called Honor Your Inner Monk. If you need a souvenir from this conference this morning, these are available in our scholar shop. We are always trying to acknowledge your financial generosity and donations. But that's the point. It's what a monk seeks is really what everybody seeks. We monks just do it in a particular way and according to a particular charter. And that's what I'd like to try to share with you today. Benedict begins his rule by calling his monks' attention to God's patience, which he considers one of God's greatest gifts to us. And he echoes St. Paul's words that our lifetimes have been extended by way of a truce, not that we can waste more time, but so that we have a little bit more time to amend our misdeeds. In other words, in the words of one movie I saw a long time ago, we have 2 lives, the life we live and the life we learn by. And Benedict would have us very much try to pay attention to the life we learn by so that we can live better. Right after he starts, Benedict lists 4 kinds of monks. The sarabaites, that's us, our kind of monks here at St. Meinrad. Those who live in a monastery under a rule and an abbot. And hermits, which he mentions there in the very first chapter and then never refers to them again, which is understandable. Again, he's writing a rule for monks who live together, not hermits. These sarabaites and hermits are the 2 kinds of monks that Benedict considers good monks. And especially, again, for the sarabaites, that's who he's writing his rule for. But then Benedict quickly turns the page and completely trashes the 2 kinds of monks he considers bad. Let's take a brief look at those. The first kind of bad monk, in his view, are the sarabaites. Now, Benedict broke down monks into two groups, bad and good, and I'm going to try not to be that nasty. What I'm suggesting is that all monks really do try to be good, but there are temptations, difficulties, obstacles that keep us from becoming better monks, that keep us from becoming better Christians, that apply to all of us, whether we're in the monastery or not. So while Benedict is talking about bad monks in his house, I think he's also suggesting that we look at a couple of difficulties all of us face in our spiritual and human growth. The sarabaites, you've got the paragraph there from the rule. Just quickly, we'll read through that. He says, and now here are the bad kinds of monks. There are the sarabaites, the most detestable kind of monks, who with no experience to guide them, no rule to try them as gold is tried in a furnace, have a character as soft as lead. Still loyal to the world by their actions, they clearly lie to God by their tonsure. 2 or 3 together, or even alone, without a shepherd, they pin themselves up in their own sheepfolds, not the Lord's. Their law is what they like to do, whatever strikes their fancy. Anything they believe in and choose, they call holy. Anything they dislike, they consider forbidden. Now, that description of the sarabaites sounds a little bit like a manifesto of self-will and determination. 3 together, even alone, without a shepherd, their own sheepfolds, their law, what they like to do, their fancy, anything they believe in. I've met some monks like that. More to the point, I can see some of that in myself as I look at my spiritual life and what I have done and what I have failed to do to grow in my relationship with God. Again, it's important to realize when Benedict is trashing the sarabaites, he's not calling for blind obedience or total passivity. Here, he is not criticizing the monk who does have a healthy sense of independence, a sense of independence tempered by honesty and humility. He criticizes rather those who think they don't need a teacher anymore, those who, in doing so, refusing to listen to the advice of others, stand only for themselves and eventually will stand only by themselves. Benedict insists that all of us continue to need a teacher, and he applies this to the abbot as well. In chapter 2, he has a long chapter on the abbot, and in the very next chapter, after making all these wonderful statements about the power the abbot has and the decisions the abbot can make at his discretion, the ability of the abbot to lay down rules and laws and ordinances, right after that long chapter, he has a chapter on insisting that the abbot call others for advice, that the abbot has a council that he can run his opinions by. His point is that the abbot should not make all the decisions entirely on his own. In the monastery, the abbot is a servant of God and is at the service of God, but he is not God. Something that I think all people in our church and outside the church who have a role and a responsibility of leadership, we forget that at our own peril and at the peril of the people we serve. The sarabaites of Benedict's rule had problems with obedience. They resided in their community more than they actually lived in it. They had, as he wrote, no experience to guide them, no rule to try them, no one to whom they would turn for advice or especially for challenge, nobody that they trusted who would call them out when that needed to be done. The sarabaites, that attitude, they are the ones who would gladly take their place at table and then complain about the food. but never volunteer to help serve the meal or wash the dishes. Perhaps the tendency of the sarabaites that lies within us at various times in our spiritual journey is our belief that we have graduated from whatever school of the Lord's service we are in, that we should be giving orders, not taking them, that we should be receiving the benefits of living in community without offering those benefits to others. And the sarabaites are the patron devils of cliques and of most groups that are concerned, that are convinced that the truth is on their side. As Benedict wrote, they pin themselves up in their own sheepfolds, not the Lord's. And as we all know, when a small group begins to talk about others, those comments are seldom positive. What's the wisdom Benedict wants to pass on? It's in the form of some questions. How readily do we listen to the criticism of others? How often do we seek the criticism, we call it feedback, from others? Especially those with whom we work and live. How often do I allow my opinions, my thoughts, my beliefs, my practices to be surrendered, even for a short time, to the judgment of others? Sarabaites are those who no longer feel they need teachers. The second bad kind of monk Benedict writes about are the gyrovagues. And there are two kind of parts to that word. Both are very suggestive. Vague kind of denotes some vagueness or uncertainty. Gyro, you may think of a spinning around or a turning around. And that's right on track. As Benedict writes, these are the monks who are called gyrovagues, who spend their entire lives drifting from region to region, staying as guests for 3 or 4 days in different monasteries. Always on the move, they never settle down and are slaves to their own wills and gross appetites. In every way, they are worse than sarabaites. Our monastic humor comes into play at least twice here. One of our favorite expressions is, yes, join the monastery and see the world. It's always been the case. Another joke that we often share with each other is that if we were to rewrite the rule of St. Benedict today, his let nothing be preferred to the work of God would be translated into let nothing be preferred to a trip. We tell the story of the monk, this is some years ago, a couple of generations ago, but still it's true, of a monk who was so anxious to get to Louisville one day, but he could not find anybody to drive him to Louisville. So he found somebody to drive him to Evansville, where he caught a plane to Louisville. Not that long ago in the past either. Such is a contemporary reflection on the vice of Benedict's gyrovagues. But again, it's not just monks. It's not just his monks. For the practice that Benedict was writing against, that they never settle down, that they are always on the go, may well be a tendency, a temptation, a not so good habit that holds us back from our growth as Christian men and women, from our growth in our relationship with God. Sometimes I'm particularly prone to this. We may find ourselves always on the go, always looking for that perfect whatever that will allow us to do what we know we need to be doing. The tiny gyrovagues that reside within us may not be wandering from monastery to monastery, but they are likely wandering all over the place inside us. The gospel tells us to live for tomorrow, to keep our eyes on the future, and the gyrovagues do indeed live for tomorrow, but in a way unlike that suggested by the gospel. always on the move. They never settle down. They are slaves to their own wills and gross appetites. Always interested in the future commitments they know they should make, theirs is the folly of the 5 foolish virgins in the gospel. Or perhaps they are more foolish than those 5 virgins in the parable. For unlike the 5 foolish virgins, they gyrovagues seldom get to the point where they actually go out and get some oil. And of course, there are all kinds of reasons for not doing that. It's too late in the day. The roads are too bumpy. The traffic is too much. And besides, there's no need to bother about it now. I hear that they're going to have a cut rate sale on lamp oil next month. Gyrovagues do not live for the future. They live thinking about the future, a future that sadly never seems to have much influence on the way they live now. The gyrovagues are the patron devils of those who live by the code. I'll do whatever it is as soon as I get around to it. And I think that without too much trouble, we could recognize that little gyrovague tendency within us. Yes, I should read more of the Bible. I'll start next week, or as soon as I get a chance to get that new translation. Yes, I'll write that thank you note as soon as my new gift cards arrive. Yes, I'll apologize as soon as she walks by my office again. Yes, as soon as I can find the time, I'll make sure I visit her in hospice. The reluctance of the gyrovague to take advantage of the gift of the present was painfully expressed in a prayer card I came across recently. A prayer card with the most haunting reminder. It read, "What would it be like if we were blessed tomorrow with only the people and the things we thought to give thanks for today?" We all have a lot of things to do. And while Benedict saw the gyrovagues of his day as those who spend their entire lives drifting from monastery to monastery, the tendency of the gyrovague that inflicts and affects us is perhaps waiting for just the right time, just the perfect time, the time when all distractions and duties will cease, the time when there finally is time to devote ourselves wholeheartedly to the work of God. Problem, of course, is that when that time comes, it will be on the other side of death, which is a poor time indeed to find ourselves with a dwindling supply of oil or a badly flickering lamp. Monastic wisdom, I have to say something about humility. After all, Benedict's chapter on humility is the longest of his 73 chapters. He talks about climbing 12 rungs on the ladder of humility, each climb, each step, of course, taking us a little bit more away from ourselves and bringing us a little bit closer to God. I'm not going to go through each of the 12, just treat them as a group by referring to one of our monastic practices here. And it's a practice I've been asked about more than once by many guests and visitors and retreatants. Somebody will come up and say, you know, Father, when you monks left evening prayer last night, I noticed that one of you got out of line and went over and actually knelt before everybody else as you were leaving. What's that all about? It's a great question, because you usually don't see something like that in church. We call the practice kneeling out, and it may well be one of those St. Meinrad monastic practices, because I don't recall seeing it in any other monastery that I've visited. And when visiting monks are here with us for a while, they seem as puzzled about it at first as our guests do. So what's it all about? Why would a monk kneel out? It's a way for us to say, not only I screwed up, but also and especially, I'm sorry, I did. I'm sorry for in some way having interrupted or disrupted our common prayer or our common life. Now, I'm not talking about the monk whose mind and attention kind of wanders off or drifts away during prayer. Otherwise, all of the monks, starting with me, would be kneeling out several times a day. But the monk who kneels out is often one who has a special responsibility for our common life, and especially for our common prayer. Usually the reader, or the organist, or the cantor. Maybe he's the sacristan and has forgotten to arrange for something. Or it's one of the monks who posted the wrong numbers on our hymn board and is wondering why nobody is singing. None of these are earth-shattering things, of course. And life goes on, and quite smoothly. But as we rub shoulders in the monastery, inside or outside, it is often the little things that seem to annoy us the most. And these little things accumulate over a period of time. We certainly kneel out for more major offenses as well. Getting a speeding ticket means our community has to pay a financial penalty that we shouldn't have to pay for. Forgetting to pick someone up at the airport means stranding him for an hour or so and inconveniencing another driver for longer than that. Forgetting an assignment means that something doesn't get done. Breaking a stack of dishes makes both noise and a mess. I mentioned above that this kneeling out might be one of those St. Meinrad practices, peculiar to the 47577 zip code. We did not invent it, however. It comes straight from the rule of St. Benedict, which has several chapters on monks making mistakes in the oratory, in the monastery, wherever. In one of those chapters, he writes, and it's the paragraph you have there, should anyone make a mistake in a psalm, responsory, refrain, or reading, he must make satisfaction there before all. If he does not use this occasion to humble himself, he will be subjected to more severe punishment. Why? Not for making a mistake, but for failing to correct by humility the wrong committed through negligence. Children, however, are to be whipped for such a fault. Just to clarify, there is no more whipping of children at St. Meinrad. Again, the value Benedict is trying to promote among us all, certainly among his monks, is the value of humility. We know we're not perfect, and we know full well we make mistakes. To err is human, after all. Most mistakes are not mortal sins for Benedict or for us. But what Benedict finds inexcusable is for a monk to be indifferent to his own mistakes, or his apparent arrogance in not acknowledging his error, and in some way trying to make amends. In Benedict's mind, the monk who is not conscious of his mistakes and does not in some way try to make amends is a monk who, in fact, is living the life of a hermit, a very bad hermit. Again, he's residing in the community's building rather than living with the people of the community. Obviously, we're not calling for a practice of kneeling out in your offices or your businesses or factories or neighborhoods, but it is interesting to consider what an extra dose of courtesy and humility might offer our neighbors and our coworkers and even our families. Perhaps a greater willingness to blame ourselves, that is, to simply say, I'm sorry, might be a bit of a calming medicine for the rage that seems so rampant in society today. It's interesting, people think a lot of times when they first are acquainted with monks that the rule is full of advice on how to pray. And it is. It certainly is. But most of the rule is taken up again with the very concrete suggestions of how do you live with people who are all supposedly going on the same mission, who supposedly have the same goals in life, to seek God, to serve one's brothers and sisters. In one of his chapters, Benedict offers a long list, 73 items, of what he calls the tools of good works. He considers these the tools that the monk has available to him in the monk's workshop. The workshop, of course, being the monastery. One reaches salvation, one moves towards God, not by ignoring the people and the place around us, but by taking full observance of them. One of these tools of good works that is closely related to what we're talking about here is do not want to be called holy before you really are. To say it in other words, don't spend a lot of time working on your reputation. Don't waste always taking the measure of what people think of you. Worry about and work instead not on your reputation, but on your conversion. Don't drive keeping your eyes focused on the rearview mirror, paying attention to what's behind, but look straight ahead. Pay attention to where you're going. As one of my favorite Yankees, Yogi Berra, once said, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. We consider St. Benedict as somewhat of an expert when it comes to dealing with people. He knows how to manage personalities of all types. He is certainly experienced in conflict management. I remember saying that to a leadership group who was having a workshop here at one time. And when I started talking about different personalities and conflicts in the monastery, immediately a hand went up and somebody said, "Are you suggesting there are difficult people in the monastery?" I said, "If you have a half an hour, come on over." And I said, actually 5 minutes will do it. So one thing I've learned over and over, and it's a very difficult thing to practice, yet it's one of the most valuable things to remember and try to practice, is Benedict's awareness that people are not created equally. How anti-American is that? Yes, all should have equal human rights. All should know that they are loved by God, that Jesus came to open the doors of heaven to us all. But all are not equal in terms of talents or understanding or ability. And that is why St. Benedict places such a high value on the virtue of discretion, which is the next paragraph you have written there. When he, the abbot, must punish them, he should use prudence and avoid extremes. Otherwise, by rubbing too hard to remove the rust, he may break the vessel. He is to distrust his own frailty. Again, we get into the whole notion of the abbot not operating entirely on his own without the feedback of others. The abbot is to distrust his own frailty and remember not to crush the bruised reed. By this, we do not mean that he should allow faults to flourish, but rather, as we have already said, he should prune them away with prudence and love as he sees best for each individual. Therefore, drawing on this and other examples of discretion, the mother of virtues, and here comes, I think, what is my favorite line in the entire rule, all 73 chapters. He must so arrange everything that the strong have something to yearn for and the weak nothing to run from. Discretion takes account of the situation and the person, their abilities, their stage in life. And perhaps parents and teachers are often the experts in practicing discretion, and they have much to teach us. What does my child need to know at age 4, at age 8, at age 13? How much can she understand right now? And what do I need to do to try to move her up to that next rung on the ladder so that when she's 13, she will be acting and thinking as a 13-year-old? Parents may not want that as such, but I think you know what I'm saying. Discretion is the virtue that allows us to find a way through the crowd to the individual. That, again, one size does not fit all. Discretion is, according to Benedict, the freedom to decide what should be done in a particular situation. It's the wisdom that comes from knowing ourselves as best as we can and trying to know those whom we're working with and whom we're working for. Discretion allows us to adapt appropriately so that we can serve different temperaments, different personalities. Discretion allows us to see that in a given situation, because of the individuals involved, what one needs for growth is not the same as what the other may need. What this means in very practical terms is that discretion guides us in treating everybody justly and rightly, which does not necessarily mean treating everybody in the same way. Benedict makes it clear that while he must love all of his monks, it would be a mistake if he were to treat all of them identically. And here, we can move on to the next paragraph. Here's how he describes the authority of the abbot. An authority with discretion. Talks about the tools of authority, and these are tools for Benedict. They're not weapons. They're ways in which he can serve. In his teaching, the abbot should always observe the apostle's recommendation in which he says, use argument, appeal, reproach. This means that he must vary with circumstances, threatening and coaxing by turns, stern as a taskmaster, devoted and tender as only a father can be. With the undisciplined and restless, he will use firm argument. With the obedient and docile and patient, he will appeal for greater virtue. But as for the negligent and disdainful, we charge him to use reproof and rebuke. Put simply, discretion guides us here and now, whether it will be better to say to this particular person in this particular situation, my brother, my sister, you can do better than you're doing right now. Here are some ways that you can grow. And yet to another person, the best remark might be, you know better. Cut out the crap. Excuse me. To summarize, again, discretion is the virtue that reminds us that when it comes to correction and encouragement, one size does not fit all. Discretion helps us serve so that the strong have something still to yearn for, and the weak have nothing to run from. And both are clearly needed in a monastic community, and I think most parish communities and families as well. I want to conclude by telling a story. It's a favorite story of mine, and one that I think is especially worthwhile for any of us, all of us, who are engaged in a life project. That is a project that's not going to be all wrapped up and completed in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. The story is not mine, and I heard it so long ago I really can't remember who it's from. But it's a great story. If you have heard it before, that's fine. If it's a new story for you, so much the better. It's a story I know I need to hear often, because it's a story that goes to the heart of our work, a story that goes to the heart of our ministry, a story that goes to the heart of how we live and work and support each other. So what exactly is it we are working for? What is the treasure we seek? Because as we know, where our treasure is, there will our hearts be also. The story begins as I think back to our Abbey Church and wonder about what it must have been like, what it must have taken to build that structure. The ground was broken in 1895, and it took 9 years just for it to get under roof. It took another 3 years before the first Mass could be celebrated in it. That's not surprising when we consider all the instruments those early builders did not have. No fancy equipment, no electrical power, no complicated mechanical or hydraulic systems to move or lift. Just men and women working from a sandstone quarry a mile away. And I'm wondering how they did it all so fast, from start to finish in 12 years. And then in this fantasy of mine, I leave Indiana and end up in Cologne, Germany. How many of you have been to Cologne? A good number, that's good. You know, they say you can always tell who the first-time visitors to Cologne are by just watching the doors of the railroad station, because the cathedral is right across the street. And the door will open and people will walk out and turn left or turn right or go into this shop or that shop. Those are obviously the people who live in Cologne. They're used to seeing this. But the first-timers, and this was me, you walk out the station and you kind of stop in your tracks until you get bumped from behind and, you know, people say, come on, come on. It is one of the most impressive man-made sights I have ever seen. The Cathedral of Cologne is almost 2 football fields long. It's 250 feet across. The height of the central nave is 150 feet, and the spires of its many towers soar just a little bit less high than the Washington Monument. The inside of the cathedral is as magnificent as the outside. Stained glass windows, golden altars, elaborate shrines, and even, as the people of Cologne will insist, the relics of the 3 Magi, the co-patrons of Cologne. But as much as a treasure chest is the inside of the cathedral, you would be easily excused, once again, if you just wanted to stay outside looking at it and taking it all in. What I kept wondering was, how did they do this with far fewer construction resources than my confreres some years ago had? No wonder the first phase of their construction lasted over 200 years. No wonder that the Cologne Cathedral, begun in 1248, was not finished until 1880, over 600 years later. This is a story about building a cathedral, or perhaps building one's life. And it's about building a cathedral and a life where not everything can be designed and built and completed within a couple of years. I'm talking about the building of a cathedral 7 or 8 centuries ago, when on day one, when ground was broken, not one of those people who were there to witness that event would have any hope of being alive when the project was finished. Let's say we're in the year 1450. The cathedral was beginning to be built about 200 years ago, 100 years ago. And everyone working there today knows it's going to take at least another 400 or 500 years to finish. So, what does one do when one knows we'll never see the end result of the project? So it's a sweltering hot summer afternoon, much like it was yesterday when you all arrived. And a lone traveler walks outside the city of Cologne through the gates. As she does, she sees off in the distance 3 men, 3 workers, each pushing a wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow is loaded with bricks and stones and all kinds of stuff like that. Each of the three workers is dirty, sweaty, perhaps even a little bit bloody. Each of them is obviously tired. It's near the end of a long, hard day. And as the first worker draws near, she goes up and says, "Tell me, good sir, what are you doing?" Well, this first worker thinks it's a pretty stupid question. So he doesn't even really stop to answer. Instead, he spits back, "What the hell does it look like I'm doing? I'm pushing a wheelbarrow full of bricks." And he continues on his way. He's not going to waste any time here. As the second worker draws near, our traveler puts the same question to him, maybe a bit more cautiously. But this second wheelbarrow pusher gives her a different answer. With just a hint of a smile on his face, he says, "I have a wife and 3 young children, and I just got this job last week. I'm finally working, and so tonight we'll eat." He moves on. After all, there is work to do, and there are hungry mouths to feed. The third worker draws near, and again our traveler asks, "And what are you doing?" Now this worker stops, lowers the handle of the wheelbarrow, sets his heavy load down and looks up at the woman, his questioner. And what she sees in this worker's eyes is much more than fatigue and weariness. She sees pride and dignity and hope. "What am I doing?" he repeats her question. "I'm building a cathedral." 3 workers. 3 workers doing objectively the very same thing. But 3 workers with very different attitudes about that work. Whether we call it intentionality or vision or perspective, or most simply attitude, how we approach our work is usually the greatest factor in determining what the value of our work is to us. Those 3 questions. What am I doing? I'm pushing a wheelbarrow loaded with bricks. The statement is true. It's a statement without vision. And so it's a statement without hope. Why am I doing this? I'm working so I can feed my family. A much better answer. There's some awareness here that what one is doing will benefit others, especially those for whom one cares. And that's got to make the work seem a bit different, a bit more precious. One sweats not to suffer, but to sustain and support. And why am I really doing this? I'm building a cathedral. And that's the best answer, of course. This worker understands that his work now will last far beyond what he will ever see or can even imagine. This worker is truly building for the future, just as others have built the future for him. Vision, perspective, attitude, whatever we call it now, how we approach our work will shape how our work shapes us. When St. Augustine presided at the Eucharist on the dedication of his church for his parishioners, he told them, "The work we see complete in this building is physical. It should find its spiritual counterpart in your hearts. We see here the finished product of stone and wood. So too may your lives reveal the handiwork of God's grace." What would St. Benedict say to all of us, monk or non-monk? Keep building. Keep building that cathedral. You'll never finish it, But you don't have to. You didn't start it. But go ahead and continue to build it a year at a time, a stone at a time. And God be with you. And with his grace, may your heart always be in the right place. You've been very patient. Thank you for your attention.